Since the ending of slavery in 1863, a lot of progress has been made in the discrimination of African Americans, and many Americans actually believe that discrimination no longer exists in the U.S., but numerous studies and analyses have shown this belief to be completely false.
On May 30th, 1921, a black shoeshiner named Dick Rowland went to an elevator, and as he was getting in the elevator, he tripped and apparently grabbed the arm of the white female elevator operator. She screamed, and he was tried for assault. At the courthouse, there was a white lynch mob that gathered, and they wanted to lynch Rowland. And so a group of African Americans tried to offer support for Rowland, and they gathered with guns. And then soon the white people had gathered with their guns, and then the riot began. And white people marched into black neighborhoods, and black people tried to defend their black neighborhoods, and it got ugly. And the death toll ranges from 39 to 300, mainly because people disposed of bodies into the river.
The March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, more commonly known as the Great March on Washington, took place on August 28, 1963. More than 2,000 buses, 21 trains, and 10 private airplanes all converged on Washington, D.C. Other regularly scheduled buses, trains, and flights were all filled. Between 200,000 and 300,000 people marched from the Washington Monument to the Lincoln Memorial. The event included many singers and speeches, the most famous of which was Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream.
Brown v. Board of Education was a U.S. Supreme Court case in which the court unanimously declared laws establishing separate schools for whites and blacks unconstitutional. The decision was handed down on May 17, 1954, and stated that segregated schools were inherently unequal. The decision met major opposition in many schools, including Little Rock Central High School. There, white segregationists, with the help of the Arkansas National Guard, blocked 9 black students from entering the school. President Eisenhower then ordered the 104th Airborne Division of the U.S. Army into Little Rock to escort the students into school.
Central High School, Little Rock, Arkansas. Troops, which for nearly 3 weeks lined the sidewalk here in front of the high school under orders to keep the colored students out, have been replaced now. And their orders to comply with the law, which means let the Negro students in if they come in.
In a 2001 experiment conducted by the Harvard Foundation of Journalism, young men were hired to pose as job applicants who were assigned resumes with equal levels of education and experience and sending them to apply for real entry-level job openings. There were 2 teams, one white and one black. 2 members of each team presented information about a fictitious criminal record which they fessed up to on the application form. During 6 months of fieldwork, the 2 teams went to 350 employers, applying for a wide range of entry-level jobs, such as waiters, sales assistants, laborers, warehouse workers, and customer service representatives. Among those with no criminal record, white applicants were more than twice as likely to receive a callback relative to equally qualified black applicants. Whites with a felony conviction fared just as well, if not better, than a black applicant with a clean background.
One of the worst cases of just blatant racism happened during the Vietnam War. African Americans only made up about 10% of the people in the army, but they made up 20% of all the casualties because so many of them were sent to the front lines. In 1965, African Americans made up 1/4 of all the people killed in Vietnam. And in 1968, the African Americans made up only 12% of the Marines, but 50% of all the people who were sent into frontline combat were African American.
Crude historical depictions of African Americans as ape-like may have disappeared from the mainstream U.S. culture, but students at the University of Pennsylvania and at Stanford have conducted research that show that many Americans associate blacks with apes. And this conduct is very troubling to many because it shows also that many people are okay with violent crimes against black people, like police brutality against African Americans, than white people because of this association with blacks as not fully human.
The belief that racism is dead is completely false. An AP poll done in 2012 found that 52% of white Americans hold explicit anti-black views, and when those white Americans took a racial attitudes test, it found that 56% held implicit anti-black views. The poll also found that 79% of Republicans hold explicit anti-black views.
In a study done by two professors who looked at over 58,000 criminal cases, they found that for the same crime, blacks were tried for almost 60% longer prison sentences than whites were. This might be because blacks only make up 13% of the U.S. population, and only 4% of judges in the United States are black. He also found that blacks were 20% more likely to be searched by the DPS, and that they were stopped for 20% longer amounts of time.
During the civil rights movement, many aspects of racism towards African Americans were supposedly eradicated, but unfortunately, racism still exists even today. Dan Monti, professor of sociology at Boston University, whose specialty is race and ethnic relations in the United States, says, "Are there still racist people out there? Absolutely. Is our society racist? No. I think there are people who will think that's just wrong, but I think Barack Obama winning the presidency of the United States is the single clearest example that we are not, because if we were, it wouldn't have happened, period." Many Americans believe that racism is no longer a problem in the United States. They believe that blacks and whites are viewed as equal in today's society. In a recent newspaper editorial, Stephen Bowden writes, "Racism died in America after decades of legislation and hundreds of billions in taxpayer reparations." Professional sports and the entertainment industry also helped. Oprah is one of the richest women in the world, and college athletic departments have produced far more black millionaires than white ones over the past 30 years. No one had to cross a picket line to get there. I'm old enough to remember what America was like in the 50s and 60s. Racism was nasty stuff, not horrid like slavery, mind you, or the mob violence and lynchings of the early 20th century, but cruel nonetheless. Major battles were fought and won between 1860 and 1960. Then, after hand-to-hand combat during the 1960s to 1980s, we finally drove a silver stake into the heart of racism and killed it dead, redundantly dead. Barack Obama's election to the presidency has simply but decisively put an exclamation point on the epitaph.
Do you believe that racism still exists in the U.S.?
Do you believe that racism still exists in the U.S.?
Do you think racism still exists in the U.S.?
Do you believe that racism still exists in the U.S.?
Yes. Yeah, probably on a covert. You know, it's not openly.
Yes. I think there's a problem.
I think it does.
In a way, yeah.
I think sometimes there's things said that are viewed as racist that really aren't.
Do you think racism is still a problem or still exists in the U.S.?
No.
What do you think we can do about it?
What do you think can be done about racism?
And what do you think we can do about it?
What do you think the United States as a whole can do about racism?
Combination of education and association.
One of the things is educating yourself, knowing what other cultures have to offer.
Show affection for your fellow man and open up doors and make sure everybody's having a nice day, and don't, be a smug about it.
I think it's just educating people about diversity in different cultures and getting people to understand other people.
Starts with a lot of educating. I think it starts with teachers being open to different race students. But I think it starts with parents as well, because parents are a huge factor in how their kids act.
Color doesn't mean anything, or whatever. We're all made, when we bleed, we all bleed red blood.
And why do you think that people are racist or discriminate?
I think anymore it leads back to how they were raised. I don't believe that they are necessarily racist themselves, but maybe a family member was racist.
But why do you think people are racist?
I think it's probably somewhat the way they were raised or somewhere. Yeah, I had like one time, came in this store, and I went to go return something, and they needed my ID, and yeah, it was a new thing that they started after Christmas. Well, I came back like a few weeks later, and I waited for somebody else to do it. It was a white lady did it, returned something. They didn't ask for no ID or anything else, and that's why I was like,
I think not knowing is what makes people fearful of other cultures and other races.
Weakness in themselves, insecurity.
I think as just time goes by, as the generations intermingle, intermarry, it'll resolve itself, but I don't know how long it'll take.
Okay, thank you.
And there's been a lot of progress since, the civil rights,
definitely.
and since Abraham Lincoln and all that. So I just think it's going to take time. I'm not sure they can legislate in something like that.
Yeah. Okay.
People's minds have just got to.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, have you ever seen racism?
No.
Happen to anyone?
No.
Okay. What do you think the nation, or never mind. What do you think about affirmative action?
I don't like it.
You don't think it's fair?
I don't think it's fair.
All right. Hey, hey puppies. Do you think racism is still a problem in the U.S.? Yeah, that's what most people have been saying. Have you ever experienced legitimate racism as a problem?
Yeah.
Okay. What do you think about? What are your views on affirmative action? No, not really. All right. Well, thanks for the interview, guys.
Thanks.
Do you believe that racism still exists in the U.S.?
I think that it probably does. It's not as common as it was before, at least not out in public.
Have you ever experienced or seen someone experience legitimate racism or discrimination?
I haven't seen legitimate racism. I've seen people make racist jokes, obviously, but I don't think they were being seriously racist.
Do you think racist jokes are okay?
Not really.
How often do you think racism occurs every day in the United States?
I'm not really sure. I haven't experienced any firsthand, obviously, or seen anybody else experience it firsthand. So,
all right. In your own country and in your own school, why does racism occur, and what do you think can be done about it?
I think racism probably still occurs just through parents teaching their kids what they thought. I'm not sure how we can really change that unless we go into their homes and change what they're doing, which I don't think is right.
Why do you think people are racist or prejudiced against certain groups of people?
The same answer as before. I think they were raised to be like that. Ignorance is a lot of it. They just don't know enough about that race to make any judgments, so they just assume that race is inferior.
And how does racism affect the lives of those who are discriminated against and those who see discrimination?
It makes life a lot harder for people who are being discriminated because they get lesser treatment, and it's a lot. I think it would end up being a lot like bullying, where they end up thinking less of themselves eventually.
Do you think we can repay the generations and generations of African Americans for the racism they have experienced?
Not unless we made ourselves slaves for them.
Okay. And what group of people do you think are individually most discriminated against?
I think in America probably still African Americans. I'm not really sure in any other place.
Do you have any ideas on why that might still occur?
The same reason as before, ignorance and just bad upbringing.
While America has come a long way since the days of slavery and the civil rights movement, discrimination still exists today and is still a problem for many African Americans. African Americans face discrimination in their workplaces, when trying to get employed for a job, in the criminal justice system, and in the military. And while you may not think it's a problem, many Americans still hold explicit anti-black views, and it's still a problem in the U.S.